So now this is on to the CSS, so the styling of my memory game. So to start off, at the top I've put an import of, basically I use different font for my game, so I had to import it. So there was two ways I could have done it. I could have either done it in my HTML or I've done it in my CSS. So I've chosen to do it in my CSS. So the reason, if I've chosen to do it in my CSS, I had to put it at the top of my CSS to make basically the document know that I'm using this styling, so that when I refer to it inside any of my CSS at the below, it knows it's been imported first, so it can get it from this URL basically. Okay, next I've used this star symbol, and that just basically means that it's universal for every single different HTML document that I've used. So for example, if I had a home page, about us page, and so forth, many different pages linked with this one website, this styling would work for every single page. So for the universal, I've used box sizing, and I've used border box. So basically, as you can see, I've commented here. What it does, it says it keeps the content within the page horizontally. So that's what box sizing does. And then I've used a font family of this, and basically I've used two. So if this one doesn't work, it will use this one. So that's my just default font for my whole document. And then I've also put margin top 0, so there's no space at the top of the page. By default, there is a set margin. I can't remember what it is, but to get rid of that, I've just said I don't want any space at the top of my page. Okay, so that's that universal styling for all the pages that I would possibly have. Next, I've put HTML. So for my HTML, so everything that's within my HTML, I've given it a minimum height of 100 VH. So that basically means, well, the reason why I did this is because when I did my colors and my background color, I should say, I used special types. I just didn't give it a simple color as like blue. I made it two, I think it was two sets of colors that blended in or mixed together. So this helped it look blended well. Otherwise, I think because I use radial gradient, it was kind of a circle one and I didn't like that effect. So using this helped it blend in horizontally across the page. So I just used this to make it blend in horizontally across the page. So that's the reason why I use this. For my body, I put a height of 100 VH, and that just takes up the body for 100% of the view of the height of the page. The background, so this is what I was talking about earlier. I've used a two-tone, so two sets of colors, and those were the two colors I used here. And you can see it using Visual Studio, it shows you the actual colors as well visually. I've text aligned everything, so all my content will be ultimately centered, text aligned. Margin 0 for the top, even though the top's already done, but I'm saying for the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. So there's basically no margin across from the top to bottom, left, right of the page. And I've also did 0 for the padding of the page also, of the body. So next, I've selected the elements H1 and P, and this is the CSS I want for it. So I've given it basically a margin of 10 px. The reason for that is because I wanted to give it a bit of space underneath the text that I had. So as you saw, I had the memory game title and the instructions for the p tag for the player. So I wanted to give it a bit of space underneath it so it wasn't too squashed together. So I gave it a margin of 10 px. Okay, and then for the button, so when the game finished, there was a reset button that came up. This was the styling that I put for my button. So I gave it a margin to give it space at the top so it didn't clash on or mix with the game, overlap it. I gave it a padding of 6 so there was space around it so the text could be seen and not squashed by the borders. I gave it a border black solid, so this is how thick I wanted it, 3 px. Border radius, so that allowed me to not have just a square box. It kind of gave it a curve around the edges. I gave it a 10 px. The background color, so I kind of wanted it to link with the theme of the game, so I kind of gave it a kind of purplish color. And also the border style, I used a ridge border style, font size 16, so that's the text I had within it, which said reset. Also for my button, I've put a on hover sort of feature. So I've done this feature where the box shadow happens, and then when you hover, it has this sort of effect with a color that happens on top of the button to show that your mouse has hovered over it. So that's for the button, and then I've selected the P tag that has the ID winner. So this is how you would select it. So this is only selecting a P tag that has the ID winner. So going back to my HTML, that is this right here. So this is the styling that I did for it. So I made the font size extra large, font weight, so the thickness of the weight of the font, bolder, padding 0, and also I put the visibility to be hidden. And the reason why I put hidden is because I still wanted that space to be there. I didn't want the space to be not there. I wanted it to be hidden, but I wanted it still to be taken up the space. This is what I would go on to change when I go to my JavaScript to display it. So the game info container, so the game info container, which is here, right? So this is basically my entire game. So this would be starting off with containing the matches, the timer, the flips, as well as the actual game of the memory game with you flipping the cards. So that contains all of that within the game info, and I've given it a grid column of 1 minus 1, and I've then explained that what would happen to it. So it will allow the text to take up the first row only. I've given it a display of flex, so using flex, it displays content horizontally across the page. So I justify the content, space between, so it puts space between different texts, and then I've used the default cursor, so that's the automatic default I've put for it. Okay, so that was just sort of the reason why I did that is just to avoid any issues, because I was going to be changing my cursors as they hovered over the card, right? So next we have the game info. So game info was basically the matches, the flips, and the time. So I've just basically did the font weight of it, so the thickness of the font, and I've also done flex auto, so it brings text positioning more center into the page. So it was basically how it was laid out across the page. I used flex auto when I was testing it. This actually made it look more better, and I liked the way it looked, so I used flex auto. And this helped because, you know, prior I used the display of flex, so that's the reason why I used that. The grid container, so the grid container now moving downwards of the actual game, which is the actual cards. The styling I had for that is I displayed it as a grid. I gave it a grid gap of 5, so this is between the columns and the rows, so the spacing between each card was 5 px, and this is across the top, bottom, right, left of the card automatically. The grid template column, I used repeat 4, and then I gave it 0.1 fr. So this is basically a shorthand of me writing the grid template, right? And then I said place content center to so it's center of the page, margin top. So I gave it a margin of 20 pixels at the top of it. So this allowed it to have space between the actual winner or loser text and the actual game itself. And then I gave it a perspective of 100 px, and that was to create a 3D effect and add this perspective. Okay, so that's the reason why I use the perspective. Okay, next, moving on to the actual card. So if you remember, on each card I gave it a class of card. So each actual card has a class of card. I've given it a border of black with 3 pixels thickness, solid. Font size 20. So as you remember, I had it have numbers inside of each card. So the font size of that would be 20 pixels. The font style will be oblique. The font weight will be bolder, and the color of it will be white. So that's the color I chose for it. And then the cursor is pointer. So as you hover over or move your mouse, I should say, on top of each card, it would automatically change the cursor to pointer. And then the height of each card I've put to 100 pixels. And then underneath it, I've put a transform style, and I've given it a preserve 3D. So basically that puts each card into a perspective container created, and then I've given it a transition of 0.5 seconds. So this just helps to make the card look as if it's has an appearance of it being flipped, basically. So the transition it would take for when it flips, it will be 0.5, so it makes it look like it's flipped. And then I've given it a on hover feature as well. So I've just basically changed the box shadow, so it kind of has a shadow as you hover actually over the card. So it kind of gives the effect that yes, your mouse is on top of it as well. So that's the reason I've done that. I did some testing here, it didn't really work, so I've commented it out so it doesn't actually affect it. Now card back, that's the next class that I've given each of these. So I've given it a background image. So as you saw before, it didn't have a plain color on it, and the reason why is because I could choose what I wanted its design to be, and I did that by selecting my own image, whatever image you can choose whatever image you decide. You save it onto your laptop, and then you can actually give or style your elements to have a background image. So I've used the background image, and then I've referenced where it can be located, and then I've given it a transition of 0.8 seconds. So that's the speed basically of the transition, and then transform, so it will rotate. So this basically makes it rotate 360 degrees instead of 180, as the text will be flipped. Basically I did 360 so that it actually flips in a circle to make it look better. I was going to do 180, but it didn't look right. So next I said when matches are found, to show the user not to click on this card. Okay, so this was basically the classes that I had to add to it, which will be explained more when I get to the JavaScript. When I get to JavaScript, it will be explained more because I've added more elements and classes in my JavaScript. But this is basically the styling that I've done for these classes. So basically, for the div has a class of card and done, and once this particular div has these two classes, the cursor will go to default, so it will no longer be a pointer. And this is to help the player know that they can no longer select this card. That's the reason why I use that kind of feature. Card done hover, so basically when they hover on top of this card that's now done, it's matched up, it doesn't have a cursor of pointer anymore, and it doesn't have the box shadow on it, which it would have had prior. So this just lets the user be more aware that these cards are inactive and they can no longer be selected. So that's the reason why I've kind of put these styling here. Okay, lastly, or finally I should say, it's just simply the colors. So this is the styling for the colors. So as you can see, each card would have to have a different color, two of the same, obviously on, so it can be a match. So I've just basically just specified a background color and given it a class so that I can link it to give or select which card I would want to have each color. So I've made sure I had two of each. So there's red here, there's green here, and there's green here. It doesn't really matter what order I pull it in, but I've done it sort of like this, making sure there's two of each, because when I get to my JavaScript I can randomize the order as such. But yeah, I've just made sure that I had the colors styled and formatted automatically by each card. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for my CSS and how I've done the CSS. Now it's time to move on to the JavaScript.